There's an old saying in war, never back a lion into a corner. Sergeant Mike Landon should have remembered that before framing Harold "Pops" Carter. Should have thought twice before planting evidence on a decorated Vietnam veteran. Should have done his homework before giving a dirty arrest order. But corruption makes men careless, makes them forget that some old soldiers never lose their teeth, makes them overlook the fact that this particular veteran had spent decades teaching his grandson, the military's most feared operator, how to hunt predators who thought themselves untouchable. Now, as Pop sits calmly in his cell, Dante Carter's shadow falls over their corrupt little empire. And everyone's about to learn why you don't touch a ghost family. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning sun streamed through the windows of May's diner, casting warm patches of light across the worn leather booths. Harold "Pops" Carter sat in his usual spot, the corner booth where he could watch both the entrance and the kitchen door. Old habits from his military days died hard, though it had been decades since he'd needed to maintain tactical awareness of his surroundings. The rich aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air, as Sarah, the new waitress, carefully balanced a pot of fresh coffee. The diner buzzed with its usual morning crowd, factory workers grabbing breakfast before their shift, retired folks reading newspapers, and locals catching up on town gossip. The clink of silverware against plates and the sizzle of bacon on the grill created a comfortable backdrop of familiar sounds. "More coffee, Mr. Carter?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for his cup. She was young, barely 20, with anxiety that seemed to follow her like a shadow. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her blue uniform was still crisp and new, unlike the faded ones worn by the veteran waitresses. "Thank you, sweetheart." Pops smiled warmly, his weathered face crinkling at the corners. At T-72, he carried himself with the same dignity and strength that had earned him decorations in Vietnam. His salt and pepper hair was cut short in the same military style he'd worn for 50 years, and his posture remained ramrod straight. "And please call me Pops. Everyone does." Sarah managed a small smile, gaining confidence from his grandfatherly demeanor. She'd started working at May's just 2 weeks ago, and Pops had been nothing but kind to her, always leaving generous tips and offering encouraging words when she made mistakes. The bell above the door chimed as Detective Randall Grayson walked in. Sarah startled at the sound, the coffee pot slipping in her grip. Dark liquid splashed across the floor, missing Pops's shoes by inches. Several customers turned to look, making her flush deeper red. "I'm so sorry." Sarah's face burned as she scrambled for a towel, her hands shaking worse than before. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes as she dropped to her knees to clean up the mess. "No harm done," Pops assured her, grabbing some napkins to help despite her protests. He noticed how she kept glancing nervously at Grayson, who had taken a seat at the counter. The detective nodded briefly in Pops's direction. They'd known each other for years, shared countless morning coffees and conversations about their time in service. Across town, a different scene was unfolding. A masked man burst through the doors of Wilson's liquor store, gun raised. The robbery was quick, efficient, almost too perfect. Tom Wilson, the 60-year-old owner, raised his hands slowly as the masked man demanded money from the register. "Don't try anything stupid," the robber warned, his voice muffled but carrying an unmistakable edge of threat. His movements were precise, practiced. This was no amateur job. Within minutes, he had the cash and was backing toward the door, keeping his weapon trained on Wilson. The black SUV that pulled up had tinted windows and no plates. The robbery itself took less than 3 minutes, surgical in its precision. As the vehicle melted into traffic, Wilson reached for his phone with trembling hands, but hesitated when he noticed something odd about the entire incident, something that didn't quite add up. In the parking lot of May's Diner, 2 men in plain clothes worked with practiced efficiency. They moved toward Pops's old blue pickup truck, their movements casual but purposeful. The taller one, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, kept watch while his partner worked the lock with professional skill. Inside the truck, they planted their cargo with methodical precision. a gun matching the one used in the robbery, and exactly $2,437 in cash, all in small bills. The money was arranged to look hastily hidden under the seat. The gun was placed in the glove compartment, wiped clean of prints and ready to be discovered. The call came into the station moments later. An anonymous tip about a suspicious vehicle matching the description from the robbery. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, but Sergeant Mike Landon was already reaching for his keys before she finished speaking, a predatory gleam in his pale blue eyes. "Old Man Carter?" Landon's thin lips curved into a cruel smile as he grabbed his jacket. The other officers in the room exchanged uncomfortable glances. They knew Landon's reputation, knew his history of targeting black residents of their small town. "It's about time we put that uppity veteran in his place. He had been waiting for an opportunity like this for years, ever since Carter had filed a complaint about his treatment of young black teenagers in the neighborhood." "Sir?" Officer James Jenkins started to speak up, his young face etched with concern. "Shouldn't we verify the—" "Shut it, Jenkins," Landon snapped, rounding on the rookie with barely contained fury. "I want a full tactical response. This suspect is considered armed and dangerous. Or maybe you'd like to explain to the chief why you're questioning a senior officer's orders." Jenkins fell silent, but his discomfort was visible. Around the station, other officers busied themselves with paperwork, avoiding eye contact. They'd all seen this before. Landon's vendetta against certain citizens, his abuse of power. But in a small town where speaking up meant career suicide, silence had become a survival strategy. Inside Mays, Pops was finishing his breakfast when his phone buzzed. A text from his old friend Reggie. "Cops moving your way. Something's wrong." Reggie was homeless but saw everything from his usual spot near the courthouse. Pops had been sharing food with him for years, ever since discovering they'd served in the same unit in '68. The message gave Pops pause. He'd learned long ago to trust Reggie's instincts. They'd kept them both alive in the jungle. His eyes swept the diner, noting exits, positions of other customers, potential threats. Nothing seemed immediately wrong, but there was a tension in the air he recognized from combat, the calm before all hell breaks loose. He stood slowly, leaving exact change on the table plus his usual generous tip for Sarah. His movements were unhurried, but purposeful as he headed toward the door. Detective Grayson watched him go, a strange unease settling in his stomach. He'd known Pops too long to ignore the deliberate way the veteran was moving. Something was definitely wrong. The morning peace shattered as 3 police cars screeched into the parking lot, blocking any escape route. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting contradictory orders that echoed off the diner's windows. Inside, customers pressed against the glass, phones recording what was unfolding. "Hands where we can see them. Get on the ground. Don't move." Pops began to lower himself, to his knees, hands raised. His face remained calm, almost detached, as though he were observing the scene from a distance. But that wasn't good enough for Landon, who rushed forward and shoved him face first onto the pavement. The rough asphalt bit into Pops's cheek as Landon wrenched his arms behind his back, cuffing him with unnecessary force. "You're under arrest," Landon growled, but never finished reading the rights. His knee pressed into Pop's back with more force than necessary, drawing a slight grunt of pain from the older man. "Stop. He's a veteran." Reggie emerged from between parked cars, his military bearing visible despite his ragged clothes. Though his jacket was worn and his beard was gray and unkempt, there was no mistaking the soldier's discipline in his stance. This man served his country. He has rights. An officer drove his elbow into Reggie's stomach, doubling him over. "Stay in the gutter where you belong, old man." Reggie collapsed to his knees, struggling to breathe, as other officers moved to push back the growing crowd of onlookers. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a sleek black SUV idled. Inside, Viktor Zolotov watched the scene unfold through tinted windows. His fingers, adorned with heavy gold rings, tapped a number on his phone. The interior of the vehicle smelled of expensive leather and the faint trace of his imported cigarettes. "The trap is set," he spoke softly, his Russian accent barely detectable after decades in America. Carter took the bait perfectly. Everything is proceeding according to plan. He ended the call, allowing himself a small smile as he watched Pops being roughly pushed into the back of a police car. In the squad car, Pops remained eerily calm. His eyes moved constantly, taking in details others might miss: badge numbers, name tags, faces. The military training that had kept him alive in the jungle now served a different purpose. He noted how Officer Jenkins looked away in shame, how Detective Grayson stood apart from the others, his posture radiating doubt. Grayson had known Pops for 15 years. They had shared countless morning coffees at Mays, traded stories about their time in service. Something about this didn't add up. The detective watched as Landon's men discovered evidence in Pops's truck, their movements too rehearsed, their surprise too practiced. Inside the diner, Sarah watched through the window, tears streaming down her face. She'd seen similar scenes before in another town with another job. It was why uniforms made her nervous, why her hands shook when police were around. May, the diner's owner, put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "That ain't right," May muttered, her lined face tight with anger. "That man comes in here every morning for 10 years, never causes a lick of trouble. Something's not right about this at all." That night, in a private room at the Blue Line, a bar favored by cops, Landon and his crew celebrated. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey as they laughed about how easy it had been, how perfectly everything had fallen into place. Landon held court at the center table, his face flushed with alcohol and victory. "Did you see how calm he tried to act?" Landon mocked, taking another long drink. "All that dignity bullshit. Well, dignity won't help him where he's going." The others laughed, but it was forced, uncomfortable. None of them noticed the rookie officer, Kyle Nash, slip away early, his face pale with disgust. As they threw Pops into a holding cell, he didn't resist. He didn't argue or plead. Instead, he smiled. A small, knowing smile that made the guards uncomfortable. His voice was quiet but carried clearly in the concrete corridor. "You boys just made the worst mistake of your lives." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise. One of the younger guards shifted nervously, but his partner just laughed it off. Tough talk for an old man facing serious charges. In his cell, Pop sat on the hard bench, back straight, head high. He thought about the phone call he would soon make, about the storm that was about to break over this corrupt little town. His grandson had inherited his smile and his talent for making people regret their choices. The last light of day faded from the tiny cell window as somewhere in the distance, a black SUV pulled away from the police station. Inside, Zolotov made another call as his driver navigated the darkening streets. "Phase 1 is complete. Prepare for his arrival." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, everything must be ready. When the grandson comes, and he will come, we need to be prepared. This isn't just about some old man anymore. This is about luring out a ghost." The SUV disappeared into the gathering darkness as night settled over the town. In his cell, Pops closed his eyes, but he wasn't sleeping. He was counting hours, remembering a phone number he'd memorized years ago but never had to use. Until now. In the empty police station, the night shift settled in for what they expected to be a quiet evening. None of them knew that the real storm was just beginning. None of them understood that they hadn't just arrested an old man. They had sparked a war, and wars had a way of destroying everything in their path. Detective Grayson sat alone in his office, staring at old photos of him and Pops at various veteran events. His gut told him this was wrong, all wrong. But in a town this size, going against Landon meant more than just risking your job. It meant risking everything. Still, as he looked at the photos, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger than a simple frame-up was in motion, something that would change their quiet town forever. And somewhere in the darkness, a phone was about to ring, carrying a message that would set it all in motion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the interrogation room as Pop sat perfectly still, his weathered hands folded on the metal table. The clock on the wall read 3:47 a.m., but he showed no signs of fatigue. 20 hours had passed since his arrest, and they'd tried everything. Good cop, bad cop, threats, Promises. Nothing had cracked his calm exterior. Let's try this one more time, old man. Detective William Foster slapped a file onto the table, his frustration evident in every movement. The gun matches the robbery. The money matches the robbery. Your truck was ID'd at the scene. Just confess. Make it easier on yourself. Pops didn't even blink. You know what we used to do in Vietnam when we caught someone planting evidence? His voice was soft, almost conversational. We'd wait. Just wait, because sooner or later, they'd make a mistake. And then, he smiled, leaving the sentence unfinished. Foster's face reddened. Before he could respond, the door opened and Sergeant Landon walked in, his presence filling the small room with an almost palpable tension. Give us the room, Foster. Landon waited until the other detective left before sitting down across from Pops. You're not in your fancy jungle anymore, old-timer. This is my town, my rules. He leaned forward, his breath smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes. Confess, or I make sure you disappear. Lots of old men have accidents in jail. Pops finally moved, tilting his head slightly as he studied Landon. You remind me of a sergeant I knew in '68. Same kind of swagger, same kind of threats. His eyes never left Landon's face. Want to know what happened to him? Landon slammed his hand on the table. One phone call, that's all you get. Make it count because after that you're in the system. And the system? It swallows men like you whole. They led Pops to a phone mounted on the wall, its cord shortened to prevent any attempts at using it as a weapon. He dialed a number from memory, one he'd kept in his head for years but never used. As it rang, he could feel Landon watching, waiting for some sign of weakness. Halfway across the world, in a remote location that didn't officially exist, Dante Carter was preparing for an operation. At 34, he was already a legend in circles where legends were rare and usually dead. His team was gearing up to eliminate a warlord who'd been selling weapons to terrorist cells. The secured satellite phone in his pocket vibrated. Only 3 people had that number. 2 of them were in the room with him. The third? Grandfather? Dante's voice was sharp, alert. Pops never called. Never. Remember when you were 10 and those boys stole your bike? Pops's voice was calm, measured. Remember what I told you about handling bullies? Dante's hand tightened on the phone. It was their code, established years ago. Corrupt authority. Immediate danger. I'm coming, hold on. Love you, son. The line went dead. Dante turned to his team, his face set in stone. Mission scrubbed. Family emergency. Before anyone could object, he was moving, stripping off his tactical gear. You can't just walk away from this, his commanding officer, Colonel James Mitchell, stepped in his path. This operation has been planned for months. Watch me. Dante's voice was soft but carried an edge that made hardened soldiers step back. You've got 2 choices. Grant me emergency leave or I go AWOL. Either way, I'm leaving. The other members of SEAL Team 6 watched in silence. They'd seen Dante in action, knew what he was capable of. Some called him a ghost, the way he could appear and disappear in the field, the way targets would drop without a sound. Now they saw something else in his eyes, something that made even Mitchell pause. 24 hours, Mitchell finally said. After that, I can't protect you. Dante was already walking away. I don't need protection. They do. Back in the police station, FBI agent Eva Monroe sat in her car, listening to the encrypted police channels through specialized equipment. She'd been tracking a pattern of corruption across several small towns, following a trail of dirty money and dead witnesses. When she heard about Pops's arrest, something clicked. Running facial recognition now, she spoke into her recorder. Harold Carter, decorated Vietnam veteran, multiple commendations for valor, 1 grandson. She paused, staring at her screen. Most of Dante's file was redacted, but what she could see made her sit up straighter. Oh, this just got interesting. Inside the station, Officer Kyle Nash stood in the evidence room, staring at the gun they'd found in Pops's truck. His hands shook as he picked it up, noting details that didn't add up. The serial number had been filed off recently. He could still see metal shavings. And the money? Admiring our handiwork? Officer Frank Thompson's voice made Nash jump. The older cop stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Word of advice, rookie. Some things you don't want to look too closely at. Some things you pretend you never saw. This isn't right. Nash's voice was barely a whisper. He's innocent. Thompson moved faster than Nash expected, pinning him against the wall. Listen carefully. You've got a nice future ahead of you. Beautiful wife, baby on the way. Be a shame if something happened to them because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Nash felt the fight drain out of him. I understand. Good boy. Thompson released him. Now put that back exactly where you found it. And remember, accidents happen to heroes too. In a penthouse suite overlooking the city, Viktor Zolotov hosted a private meeting. The room spoke of old money and refined taste. Persian rugs, antique furniture, crystal decanters filled with expensive scotch. His guests were men of influence: Congressman Robert Whitman, Police Commissioner David Pierce, and CEO Jeffrey Morgan of Morgan Development Corporation. The grandfather was necessary, Zolotov explained, pouring drinks. The real target is the grandson. For years he's been a thorn in our side, disrupting operations across 3 continents. Now, he'll come to us. This seems excessive for one man. Congressman Whitman swirled his scotch nervously. The risk is calculated. Zolotov cut him off. Dante Carter isn't just any operator. He's a ghost, the most lethal Navy SEAL alive. But even ghosts become vulnerable when family is involved. Commissioner Pierce leaned forward. My men can handle 1 soldier. Zolotov's laugh was cold. Your men? They're not even speed bumps to someone like him. No, we have other arrangements in place. Professional contractors, ex-military, the best money can buy. And the old man? Morgan asked. Once Carter arrives? We'll have an unfortunate accident in his cell. Zolotov's smile didn't reach his eyes. A tragedy, really. The stress of false accusations leading to a heart attack. These things happen. On a military transport plane somewhere over the Atlantic, Dante sat alone checking his phone. Messages were already coming in from his network, other operators, intelligence assets, people who owed him favors. In 6 hours, he'd have everything he needed. Building layouts, patrol schedules, personnel files. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 hours to touchdown, sir. Dante closed his eyes, but not to sleep. He was remembering weekends at his grandfather's house, learning tracking, survival skills, how to read people. Pops had known, somehow. Known that his grandson would need these skills. Known that one day, something like this might happen. Hang on, Pops, he whispered. I'm coming. Back in his cell, Pops sat on his bunk, reading a worn paperback book he'd been allowed to keep. Other inmates watched him curiously. Most men his age would be breaking down by now, but he seemed almost peaceful. Another prisoner called out from 2 cells down. Hey, old-timer, what you in for? Pops turned a page without looking up. Waiting. Waiting for what? Now Pops did look up, and something in his expression made the other man step back from his bars. You ever see what happens when you back a lion into a corner? The question hung in the air, heavy with promise. Down the corridor, a guard shifted uncomfortably, remembering stories from Vietnam. Stories about men like Carter, who'd survived. Things that would break most people. In her office at the FBI field office, Agent Monroe was building a wall of connections. Photos, documents, bank records, all pointing to something bigger than a simple false arrest. She'd traced wire transfers from offshore accounts, all leading back to shell companies with Russian connections. Her phone buzzed. A contact at the Pentagon. You need to back off this one, Eva, the voice warned. Carter's grandson. He's not someone you want to get tangled up with. Why? She pressed. What makes him so special? A long pause. Let's just say there's a reason certain missions don't exist on paper, and he's usually the reason why. Monroe hung up, staring at her evidence wall. Something bigger was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Detective Grayson sat in his car outside the station, wrestling with his conscience. He'd known Pops for years, shared countless cups of coffee, listened to stories about his grandson. Never anything specific, just proud grandfather talk. But now, his phone rang. His wife, Amanda. "Honey, there are men watching the house. They say they're police, but..." Grayson's blood ran cold. "Take Tommy and go to your sister's, now. Don't pack. Don't ask questions. Just go." "What's happening?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, it's bigger than we thought." In the evidence room, Nash sat alone, staring at his phone. On the screen was a draft email to Internal Affairs, detailing everything he'd seen. His finger hovered over the send button as Thompson's threats echoed in his mind. A noise made him look up. Standing in the doorway was Landon, his face twisted, in a sneer. "Making a mistake, rookie?" Nash quickly pocketed his phone. "No, sir, just checking inventory. Smart boy." Landon's smile was all teeth. "Remember, loyalty is everything in this job. Everything." As night fell over the city, different players moved into position. Zolotov's men took up surveillance points around key locations. Corrupt cops altered patrol schedules to ensure certain areas would be unmonitored. Money changed hands, threats were made, and pieces fell into place. In his penthouse, Zolotov received another call. "The package is in motion. 8 hours until touchdown." "Perfect." He hung up and walked to his window, looking out over the city. He'd spent years corrupting. "Come to us, Ghost. Come and meet your end." What none of them knew, what none of them could know, was that they weren't just inviting one man into their trap. They were inviting destruction. Because Dante Carter hadn't earned his reputation by playing by others' rules. At the airport in Dubai, Dante boarded his connection to the States. A flight attendant noticed how still he sat, how his eyes constantly scanned the cabin. She'd seen soldiers before, her brother was in the Marines. But this was different. This man wasn't just alert, he was hunting. In his cell, Pops smiled slightly as lights out was called. He'd meant what he said about waiting for mistakes. Already he could see the cracks forming. Landon's arrogance, Thompson's heavy-handed threats, the rookie's conscience, all pieces in a game they didn't even know they were playing. "Lights out," a guard called. "Everyone quiet down." In the darkness, Pops whispered words he'd learned long ago, in another time of waiting. "They call this a cage, but they don't understand. Sometimes the cage isn't there to keep someone in. Sometimes, it's there to keep everything else out." The night settled over the town like a blanket. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. In homes and offices, in cells and penthouses, people moved through their routines, unaware that everything was about to change. Because in 8 hours, a ghost would touch down. And ghosts, as Zolotov was about to learn, had a way of turning traps into graves. Dawn broke over the city as Dante Carter's rental car cruised through the streets of his childhood neighborhood. The working-class area had changed since he'd spent summers with his grandfather. More boarded-up windows, more desperation in the faces of people hurrying to early morning jobs. Fear hung in the air like a toxic fog. He drove past the old basketball court where Pops had taught him to shoot hoops. Now it was cracked and overgrown, the rim bent and netless. A group of teenagers watched his car pass, their eyes hard and suspicious. This wasn't just decay. This was engineered poverty, the kind that came from systematic corruption. The police station loomed ahead, a 3-story brick building that tried to project authority, but just looked tired. Dante parked across the street, studying the flow of officers coming and going. His trained eye caught details others would miss. Which officers moved like they had something to hide, which ones avoided eye contact with their colleagues, which ones carried themselves with unearned swagger. Inside, Officer Kyle Nash was just ending his night shift when the front desk officer's voice crackled over the radio. "Heads up, someone's asking for Carter." Nash moved to the window, watching as a tall, powerfully built black man in civilian clothes walked through the front doors. There was something about his movement that made Nash's spine tingle, the fluid grace of a predator. Dante approached the front desk, his face neutral, but his eyes missing nothing. 2 cameras in the lobby. 3 officers present. Emergency exit, to the left. I'm here about Harold Carter. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Brooks, looked up with practiced boredom. Visiting hours start at 9. I'm not here to visit. Dante's voice was soft but carried to every corner of the lobby. I'm here about the false charges. Brooks's hand drifted toward his weapon, a motion Dante noted without appearing to notice. You got ID? Dante Carter, his grandson. He produced his military ID. Now, would you like to get Sergeant Landon, or should I go find him myself? The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brooks grabbed his phone, muttering, urgently. Within minutes, Landon appeared, his face flushed with barely contained anger. Big talk for a guy with no badge. Landon sneered, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate. This is a police matter. Military has no jurisdiction here. Dante stepped closer, his movement so smooth it made Landon flinch slightly. I don't need jurisdiction. His voice was barely above a whisper. What I need is for you to understand something. My grandfather is innocent. You know it. I know it. And now you have exactly 1 chance to fix this before I start fixing things my way. Is that a threat? Landon's hand moved to his gun. No, Sergeant. Dante's smile was cold. That's a courtesy notice. From his office, Detective Grayson watched the confrontation through his window. He'd seen plenty of tough guys in his career, plenty of people who tried to intimidate with words or posture. This was different. This man moved like someone who had seen the darkest parts of the world and come back harder. Grayson made a decision. He wrote a quick note, folded it, and walked past Officer Nash, deliberately bumping into him. The note passed between them, smoothly, a technique from his undercover days. Nash felt the paper in his pocket and waited until he was alone in the locker room to read it. Storage facility on Wilson Street. Unit 23, what they don't want you to find. Meanwhile, FBI agent Monroe was connecting more dots. The offshore accounts she'd traced didn't just lead to Zolotov. They led to a network of corrupt officials across 3 states. Police chiefs, judges, politicians, all taking money to look the other way while something bigger was being built. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3, 1 hour. She recognized the signature pattern of communication. Someone, on the inside, wanted to talk. Across town, Dante followed his first lead. The dead informant's apartment was a dingy 1-room affair in a building that should have been condemned years ago. The police tape on the door was fresh, supposedly a suicide. But Dante knew better. The lock took him seconds to pick. Inside, the apartment had been tossed by professionals looking for something specific, but they'd missed the loose floorboard under the bed. Amateur mistake. Inside was a phone and a notebook. The phone was dead, but the notebook, names, dates, amounts, all pointing to something bigger than a simple frame-up. His grandfather hadn't just been targeted randomly, he'd been chosen. But why? A creak in the hallway was his only warning. Dante moved on pure instinct, rolling away from the door as it burst open. 4 men in tactical gear, armed with suppressed weapons, professional hitters. The first one died before he cleared the doorway, a thrown knife to the throat. The second managed to fire once before Dante's hands snapped his neck. The third and fourth were smarter, trying to maintain distance, but in close quarters, against someone like Dante, distance was an illusion. When it was over, 4 bodies lay cooling on the floor. Dante retrieved his knife, wiping it clean. These weren't local talent. Their gear was too good, their tactics too practiced. Someone was spending serious money to keep secrets buried. Back at the station, Detective Grayson received a visitor he'd been dreading. Viktor Zolotov walked into his office like he owned it, which in a way he did. Detective? Zolotov's accent was barely noticeable. I understand you've known Mr. Carter for many years. That's right. Grayson kept his voice neutral. Then you understand why it would be unfortunate if anything happened to your family. Your son Tommy, he's quite good at baseball, isn't he? Grayson's hands clenched under his desk. What do you want? The grandson. When he comes asking questions, you'll tell him nothing. Nothing about the offshore accounts, nothing about the development plans, nothing about why his grandfather was chosen. Zolotov smiled. Simple, yes? After Zolotov left, Grayson sat for a long moment thinking about choices and consequences. Then he made a call to his wife. Take Tommy and go to your mother's. Now, don't tell anyone where you're going. Officer. Nash's hands shook as he approached Storage Unit 23. The key had been exactly where Grayson's note said it would be, taped under a specific park bench. Inside, he found boxes of documents, evidence logs, financial records, crime scene photos that told different stories than the official reports. Quite a collection, isn't it? The voice behind him made him freeze. He turned to find Dante Carter standing in the doorway. I was just following your conscience. Dante stepped inside, closing the door. Good. Because I need someone on the inside, and you need someone who can protect you from what's coming. Nash swallowed hard. They threatened my family. They always do. Dante's voice softened slightly. But here's the thing about men like that. They only have power if we give it to them. Now tell me everything you know. An hour later, Agent Monroe waited in the parking garage, her hand near her weapon. Footsteps approached. A man in an expensive suit, looking nervously over his shoulder. I don't have much time, the man spoke quickly. Zolotov's planning something big. The old man, Carter, he was chosen because of his grandson. They needed someone who could bring him here. Why? Because he knows things. Things about operations overseas, about who's really running certain military contracts. They can't touch him officially, so they're using his grandfather as bait. A sound made them both turn, but it was too late. The shooter had positioned himself perfectly. 2 shots, both clean. The informant was dead before he hit the ground. Monroe dove behind a concrete pillar, returning fire, but the shooter was already gone. When backup arrived, all they found was a dead body in a shell casing. But Monroe had seen something in the brief exchange of fire, the shooter's technique. Military trained, but not American military. Something else. Dante's next stop was one of Zolotov's enforcers, a man known on the street as the Butcher. He found him in a private room at an exclusive club, surrounded by expensive whiskey and cheap women. The guards outside the door never saw what hit them. Inside, the women screamed and ran as Dante entered. The Butcher reached for a gun, but Dante was already there, hand clamping down on his wrist with crushing force. The old man, Dante spoke calmly while applying pressure. Why him? You're crazy, the Butcher gasped as bones ground together. They'll kill you for this. Wrong answer. A quick twist, and the wrist snapped. The Butcher's scream was cut short by Dante's hand around his throat. Let's try again. Why my grandfather? 2 minutes later, Dante had what he needed. The Butcher lay unconscious, his broken wrist the least of his concerns. As Dante left through the back door, he called Agent Monroe, a number he'd gotten from Mace. His own sources. The development project, he said when she answered. That's what this is about. They're using real estate to launder money from overseas operations. How did you get this number? Same way I got yours. We need to talk. I have evidence, she said. But I need more. Something concrete linking Zolotov to the corruption. Work with Detective Grayson. He's one of the few clean ones left. I'll handle the rest. In his cell, Pop sat reading his book when he heard the guards changing shifts. Something in their movement caught his attention. These weren't the regular guards. Their boots were too new, their movements too practiced. He smiled slightly. Zolotov was making his move. Across town, Dante prepared for his final push. The evidence was mounting. Corrupt cops, dirty money, a real estate scheme that was just the tip of the iceberg. But he needed proof that would stick, proof that even Zolotov's money couldn't bury. His phone buzzed. A text from Nash. They're moving your grandfather tonight. Private facility. Off the books. Another piece clicked into place. They were never going to let Pops live to see a trial. This had all been about drawing Dante out, using his grandfather as bait. Well, 2 could play that game. In his penthouse, Zolotov received the reports with growing anger. The dead hit team. the butcher's broken wrist, the informant in the parking garage. Everything was proceeding according to plan, except for one detail. Dante Carter was supposed to be on the defensive, running scared. Instead, he was hunting. "Send in the specialists," he ordered. "I want him dead by morning." But as night fell over the city, it wasn't Dante who should have been worried, because while they were hunting him, he was hunting them. And he'd learned, from the best, from a grandfather who taught him that patience was just as deadly as any weapon. In the growing darkness, different players moved their pieces. Monroe gathered her evidence. Nash copied files. Grayson made quiet phone calls to trusted colleagues in other departments. And Dante prepared for war. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the predator would become the prey. And as Pops had taught him long ago, sometimes the best trap was letting your enemy think they had you cornered. In his cell, Pops smiled at the fake guards. He could read their tension, their barely concealed anticipation. They thought they were the hunters. They didn't understand that in this game, they were just pawns, and pawns, as any good chess player knows, are often sacrificed first. Rain fell in heavy sheets as Officer James Wilson hurried to his car after his shift. His hands shook as he fumbled with his keys, dropping them in a puddle. When he straightened up, a shadow materialized behind him. "Get in the car." Dante's voice was barely audible over the rain. "Driver's seat. Keep your hands where I can see them." Wilson's throat went dry. He'd been dreading this moment since helping plant evidence in Pops's truck. The drive was silent, Dante directing him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, Wilson found himself zip-tied to a chair under harsh fluorescent lights. Dante moved like a ghost around him, setting up recording equipment. With methodical precision. "Please," Wilson's voice cracked. "I have a family." "So does my grandfather." Dante pulled up a chair, his face expressionless. "Start with the money. Where does it go?" "Zolotov owns this town. He'll kill me if I talk." "And I'll kill you if you don't." Dante leaned closer. "The difference is, Zolotov will make it slow. I'll make it quick. Your choice." Wilson broke. The words poured out like the rain outside. Offshore accounts, corrupt judges, dirty cops. "Zolotov, he owns everything. The development project is just a front. They're using construction contracts to launder money from overseas operations. The Russian connection? Former intelligence operators. They're building a network across the East Coast. Your grandfather. He was chosen because of you. They needed bait." Dante's expression didn't change. "Who else is involved?" "Police Commissioner Pierce, Mayor Andrews, half the city council. The money. It goes through shell companies then, into legitimate businesses. The construction sites are just moving cash." As Wilson talked, Dante recorded everything. When it was done, he copied the files to multiple drives. "If anything happens to my grandfather, this goes public. Every name, every account, every dirty secret. They'll kill me anyway." "Not if you're smart." Dante cut the zip ties. "There's a ferry leaving for South America tonight. I suggest you're on it." Across town, 4 armed men moved through a parking garage, hunting their target. They were ex-military, professionals who commanded top dollar. Their orders were simple: eliminate Dante Carter. They found his motel room empty. As the team leader reached for his radio, a shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him. The other 3 men never even heard their leader die. The second man went down with a crushed larynx. The third managed to turn before a knife found his heart. The fourth got off 2 shots before Dante's hand snapped his neck. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. In the motel room, Dante searched the dead men's gear. Russian-made weapons, high-end tactical equipment. These weren't street thugs. They were serious operators. Which meant Zolotov was getting nervous. His phone buzzed. A text from Nash. "Detective Grayson's wife just got another threat. They're watching his house." Dante considered his options. Grayson was one of the few clean cops left, and he needed him alive. But moving against Zolotov's men would show his hand. Unless FBI agent Monroe sat in her office, staring at financial records that made her head spin. The corruption wasn't just deep, it was sophisticated. Construction companies bidding on projects that never broke ground, shell corporations buying land at inflated prices, all of it designed to hide the flow of money. Her phone rang. An unlisted number. "You should check the Graham Street construction site." Dante's voice was clear despite the rain. "Specifically the foundation they poured last week." "Why?" "Because that's where they buried the last person who asked too many questions." Monroe grabbed her coat. "I need a team I can trust. Use the state police. Local cops are compromised." At the construction site, under the glare of portable lights, state troopers with ground-penetrating radar found what Dante had promised. The body was that of a journalist who'd gone missing 3 months ago while investigating the development project. Detective Grayson sat in his darkened living room, gun in his lap, watching shadows move outside his house. His wife and son were safe at her sister's, but the threat remained. Every creak, every rustle of leaves made his hand tighten on the weapon. A soft tap at his back door made him spin. Dante stood there, rain dripping from his clothes. "We need to talk." Inside, Grayson poured 2 fingers of whiskey with shaking hands. "They're going to kill him, aren't they? Your grandfather?" "Not if I can help it." Dante remained standing, watching the windows. "But I need to know everything, every detail about that day." Grayson took a long drink. It was too perfect. The anonymous tip, the evidence in his truck, even the timing, right when Landon was on duty. They knew exactly how he'd react, because they've done this before. The development project. It's not just here. They're doing it in cities up and down the coast, using construction projects to clean money from overseas operations. Your grandfather, he was just in the way. No. Dante's voice was firm. He was chosen. They needed someone I'd come for. A sound outside made them both freeze. Headlights swept across the house as a car drove past. The 3rd time in 10 minutes. They were being watched. "Get your things," Dante ordered. "You're not safe here." "Where am I supposed to go?" "I've got a safe house. Monroe will meet us there." As they slipped out the back door, a red dot appeared on Grayson's chest. Dante moved without thinking, tackling the detective as shots shattered the night. They rolled, behind a garden wall as more bullets chipped away at the bricks. "Stay down!" Dante was already moving, using the darkness and rain to his advantage. The shooter was good, but Dante was better. He circled around, coming up behind the sniper's position in a tree across the street. The man never knew what hit him. One moment he was scanning for targets, the next he was falling. Dante caught him before he hit the ground, lowering the body silently. More Russian equipment, more professional gear. The noose was tightening. Back at the station, Officer Nash received a warning he couldn't ignore. A photo appeared on his phone, his pregnant wife shopping at the grocery store. The message was clear: stay in line. Instead of breaking him, the threat hardened his resolve. He began copying files, taking photos of evidence, documenting everything. If they were going to kill him anyway, he'd make sure the truth got out. At the Blue Line bar, Sergeant Landon drank heavily, trying to steady his nerves. Everything was falling apart. Wilson had disappeared. The hit teams had gone silent. And now the state police were digging up bodies. His phone rang. "Zolotov. The transfer happens tonight. No more delays." "It's too hot," Landon protested. "We should wait. Your opinion is noted. Your participation is not required." The line went dead. In his penthouse, Zolotov made another call. "Is the facility ready?" "Yes, sir. Full security team in place. If Carter follows the transfer, we'll be ready." "Good. Make sure there are no witnesses. No loose ends." Zolotov hung up and walked to his window, looking out over the city he'd spent years corrupting. Everything had been perfect until now. The police were bought. The politicians were paid. The money flowed freely. But one old man and his grandson threatened to bring it all down. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You don't deserve an easy death." In his cell, Pops heard the guards changing shifts. The new ones moved differently, more professional, more dangerous. These weren't regular corrections officers. These were Zolotov's men. "Time to go, old man," one of them growled. "Special. Transfer orders." Pop stood slowly, his face showing nothing. But inside, he was smiling. Because he knew something they didn't. He knew his grandson. Across town, Dante prepared for war. Weapons were cleaned and checked. Plans were memorized. Contingencies were set in place. The rain continued to fall, washing away evidence of the night's violence. Agent Monroe worked through the night, building her case. The body at the construction site was just the beginning. With Nash's help, she was connecting dots that led to the highest levels of city government. "How deep does it go?" Nash asked, looking at the evidence wall. "All the way to the top." Monroe pinned up another photo. "The mayor, the police commissioner, even federal judges. They've spent years building this network. And my wife? My baby?" Monroe's face softened. "We've got them somewhere safe. Witness protection is standing by." A crash of thunder made them both jump. The storm was getting worse, but it wasn't the weather that worried them. Something bigger was brewing. In a safe house across town, Detective Grayson nursed his wounds and made calls to trusted officers in other jurisdictions. The word was spreading. Something big was about to break in their quiet little city. Dante's phone buzzed again. Nash with an update. The transfer was scheduled for midnight. 3 vehicles, heavy security. They were taking no chances. But neither was Dante. He'd spent hours studying the route, identifying choke points, planning ambush sites. They thought they were moving his grandfather to a secure facility. Instead, they were driving into a trap at the police station. Landon paced in his office, drinking directly from a bottle of cheap whiskey. His phone kept buzzing. Reporters asking questions about the body at the construction site. The mayor demanding answers. Zolotov making threats. Knock at his door made him jump. Officer Jenkins stood there looking uncomfortable. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." "I told you no visitors." "Sir, it's the FBI." Landon's face went pale. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. None of this was part of the plan. In the holding cells, Pops waited calmly as they prepared for the transfer. The fake guards were nervous, their movements jerky with tension. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know what. One of them made the mistake of getting too close. "Move it, old man." Pops's voice was soft, meant only for the guard's ears. "You know what the difference is between you and me, son? I've seen real killers. Men who could end you without breaking a sweat. And right now, you're about to meet one." The guard stepped back, unnerved by the old man's smile. Outside, the rain continued to fall as midnight approached. Different players moved into position like pieces on a chessboard. Dante checked his weapons one last time. Monroe positioned her trusted agents. Nash made sure key evidence was safely uploaded to secure servers. The storm was about to break, but it wasn't the thunder they needed to fear. It was the shadow that moved through the rain, the ghost that hunted in the darkness, the son who had learned war from his grandfather and was about to teach this city the meaning of fear. Because Dante Carter hadn't come home to save his grandfather. He'd come home to tear down an empire. And empires, as history had shown, often fell in the rain. Lightning split the sky as Dante moved through the shadows of the private detention facility. The rain had become his ally, masking his approach as he studied the building's security. 2 guards at the main entrance, another pair patrolling the perimeter, and cameras covering every angle, except one. The facility itself was a converted warehouse, officially listed as a storage center for the development project. In reality, it was where problems disappeared. Tonight, it would become something else entirely, a hunting ground. Inside, Pop sat in a holding cell, hands cuffed to a metal table. His face showed new bruises. They'd been rough during transport, trying to provoke a reaction. Instead, he'd simply smiled, which seemed to unnerve them more than any resistance. "Your grandson can't help you here," one of the guards sneered, a man with a prison tattoo visible under his uniform sleeve. "This isn't some military operation. This is our house." Pops looked at him with something close to pity. "Son, you really don't understand what's coming, do you?" The first guard went down silently as Dante emerged from the shadows behind him. A precise strike to the throat, followed by pressure on the carotid artery, unconscious in seconds. The second guard reached for his radio but never made it. Dante's hands moved with surgical precision, and another body slumped to the wet pavement. Inside the security office, the cameras showed nothing but rain-swept corridors. The guard monitoring the feeds never saw the shadow that entered behind him, never felt the needle that delivered a precise dose of sedative. Dante accessed the security system, noting the patrol patterns, the camera blind spots, the emergency protocols. Everything professional, everything by the book, which made it predictable, vulnerable. In his office at the police station, Sergeant Landon paced like a caged animal. His phone wouldn't stop ringing, the mayor demanding updates, Zolotov expecting confirmation, reporters asking questions he couldn't answer. The bottle of whiskey on his desk was nearly empty. "This is all wrong," he muttered, staring at the rain-streaked windows. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." His radio crackled. "Sir, we've lost contact with the detention facility." Landon's face went pale. "Send everyone. Now." But everyone wasn't what it used to be. Half his corrupt officers had already gone into hiding, spooked by the FBI investigation. The others were watching their own backs, wondering who would flip next. What had been a tight operation was now unraveling like a cheap sweater. Outside the facility, police cars began arriving, lights flashing against the storm clouds. Inside, Dante moved like a ghost through the corridors. 3 more guards went down before they knew he was there. Each neutralized silently, efficiently, the way he'd been trained. He found Pops in a holding cell on the 2nd floor, still handcuffed to the table. Their eyes met, and decades of understanding passed between them. "Took you long enough." Pops smiled, showing teeth stained with blood from his split lip. Traffic was hell. Dante made quick work of the cuffs. "Can you move?" "Son, I was running. Combat missions while you were still in diapers. I can move." A commotion downstairs told them reinforcements had arrived. Dante helped Pops up, noting how his grandfather moved stiffly. They'd worked him over pretty good during transport. "We've got company," Dante said, checking his weapon. "Good." Pops's voice was hard. "I owe some of them a conversation." Across town, FBI agent Monroe received the alert about the detention facility. She mobilized her trusted team, but she knew they'd be too late. This wasn't about stopping Dante. It was about containing the aftermath. "Get me everything on that facility," she ordered. "Building permits, ownership records, utility bills. If they've been holding people there, I want proof." Officer Nash worked frantically at his computer, copying files before they could be deleted. Already he could see records disappearing as someone tried to cover their tracks, but he was faster, capturing evidence of every illegal detention, every falsified report. His phone buzzed, a photo of his wife at the safe house, but this time, instead of fear, he felt anger. They'd pushed him too far, threatened the wrong family. The mayor called an emergency meeting, summoning his corrupt allies to his office. Police Commissioner Pierce arrived looking haunted. Council members paced nervously. Everyone could feel the noose tightening. "We need to contain this," the mayor insisted, his face slick with sweat despite the air conditioning. "If Carter talks—" "Carter's not our problem," Commissioner Pierce interrupted. "His grandson is tearing this city apart piece by piece, and he's not going to stop." Back at the facility, Dante and Pops moved carefully through the building. The sound of boots on metal stairs echoed through the corridors, Landon's men searching floor by floor. "Remember that time in Montana?" Pops asked as they took cover. "When those poachers thought they had us cornered?" Dante smiled grimly. "They didn't know we'd circled behind them." "Exactly." Pops checked around the corner. History has a way of repeating itself. The first group of corrupt cops found only empty corridors and unconscious guards. The second group started getting nervous when their radios went silent. The third group decided retreat was the better part of valor. Outside, Detective Grayson arrived to find chaos. Police cars everywhere, officers arguing about jurisdiction, and the growing realization that they were outmatched. "Stand down," he ordered, using his senior detective status. "Nobody goes in there. That's a direct order." "Since when do you give orders?" Landon appeared, face flushed with alcohol and rage. "Since this became a federal investigation." Grayson stood his ground. "Or would you like to explain to the FBI why you're interfering?" The rain had become a full-blown storm now, lightning illuminating the scene in stark flashes. Those flashes revealed fewer and fewer officers. The smart ones were already leaving, wanting no part of what was coming. Inside, Dante and Pops reached the roof access, but instead of escaping up, they went down, back into the building, back into the hunt. "You know what's funny?" Pops said as they moved. "They think they trapped us in here with them." A corrupt officer turned a corner, raising his weapon. Dante's hands moved faster. The man dropped without a sound. "Poor bastards," Pops nodded at the fallen officer. "They don't realize they're trapped in here with us." Across the city, people were starting to talk. Videos of Pops's arrest had surfaced online. Questions were being asked about the development project. Witnesses were coming forward with stories of corruption and threats. In his penthouse, Zolotov received the news with cold fury. Years of careful planning, of building his empire piece by piece, all threatening to collapse because of one old man and his grandson. He made a call. "Send in the Spetsnaz team, all of them." 10 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the facility. 4 men in tactical gear emerged, ex-Russian special forces, veterans of operations that didn't officially exist. Their orders were simple: no survivors. They entered through a side door, moving with the precision that had made them legendary in their former unit. But they'd never hunted someone like Dante Carter. The first operator died silently, a garrote wire ending his life before he could raise an alarm. The second turned just in time to see a shadow move, his last sight in this world. The third and fourth were smarter, working as a team, covering each other's angles. But they were used to being the predators. Tonight, they were prey. In the facility's main security office, Landon and his remaining loyal officers set up a command post. Screens showed empty corridors, unconscious guards, and spreading pools of blood. "He's hunting us," one officer whispered, his earlier bravado gone.
"Like animals."
"Shut up!" Landon's hand shook as he poured another drink. "He's just one man." "No," Pops's voice came from the doorway. "He's my grandson." They spun to find the old veteran standing there, wearing a guard's tactical vest, holding a dead operator's weapon. Behind him, shadows moved. Outside, Agent Monroe arrived with her team to find a perimeter forming naturally, not to keep anyone in, but to contain what was about to happen. "Nobody goes in," she ordered. "Whatever's going to happen in there, let it happen." The storm reached its peak as lightning crashed overhead. Inside the facility, the hunters had become the hunted. Dante moved through the darkness like a force of nature, decades of training and experience focused into perfect, lethal efficiency. Landon and his men fired blindly at shadows, their shots echoing through empty corridors. Fear had replaced training. Panic had replaced procedure. They'd spent years bullying the weak and protecting the corrupt. Now they faced something else entirely. The last 2 Russian operators took up defensive positions, their backs to a wall, weapons covering both approaches. They were professionals. They'd fought in places that didn't exist on maps, survived things that couldn't be explained. One of them noticed a ceiling panel slightly out of place. Before he could raise his weapon, Dante dropped from above. The fight was brief, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Commissioner Pierce arrived at the facility just in time to see his corrupt empire crumbling. Officers were leaving in droves, radios were full of panic, and the rain washed away any pretense of control. His phone rang. "Zolotov. Fix this." It's too late. Pierce watched lightning illuminate the scene. "Carter's loose. His grandson's loose. We've lost control." "Then you've outlived your usefulness." The line went dead, leaving Pierce to wonder which would get him first, Dante or Zolotov's cleaners. Inside, Landon made his last stand in a corner office. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold his weapon. Bottles lay empty around him, liquid courage that had run dry. The door opened slowly. Dante stood there, a shadow backlit by emergency lights. "Wait." Landon raised his hands. "I can tell you everything. Names, accounts, the whole operation." "That's the thing about corruption." Dante's voice was soft. "Eventually everyone talks. We already know everything." The last thing Landon saw was movement in the darkness. Then nothing. As midnight approached, the storm began to ease. The facility stood silent, its corridors telling a story of precision and retribution. Agent Monroe's team found unconscious guards, zip-tied corrupt officers, and enough evidence to bring down half the city's leadership. Pops walked out under his own power, refusing medical attention. Detective Grayson met him with a thermos of coffee, their usual morning ritual, just a few hours early. "Quite a night," Grayson said, pouring 2 cups. "Had worse in 68. Pops took a sip. "Better coffee back then, though." Officer Nash arrived, with a file folder thick with evidence. "We got it all, the whole operation, money trails, corrupt officials, everything." Monroe nodded in satisfaction. "And your family? Safe. Witness protection has them out of state. We'll rejoin them once this is done." The mayor's office was in chaos as news broke of the night's events. Staff members shredded documents and wiped hard drives, but it was too late. The evidence was already secure, the witnesses already talking. In his penthouse, Zolotov received the news with unnatural calm. He'd survived worse, rebuilt from nothing before. But as he reached for his phone to begin implementing contingency plans, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Looking for this?" Dante stepped forward, holding Zolotov's phone. The Russian's hand moved toward a desk drawer, but Dante was faster. Much faster. "How?" Zolotov gasped as steel fingers closed around his throat. "You targeted my grandfather." Dante's voice was conversational. "Used him as bait. Thought you could control the situation." The pressure increased slightly. "That was your first mistake." When it was over, Dante left Zolotov alive. Barely. Sometimes living with defeat was worse than death. Dawn broke over the city. The storm finally passed. At May's diner, Pops sat in his usual booth, drinking coffee with Detective Grayson. Sarah, the waitress, cried when she saw him, then gave him free pie. "What happens now?" Grayson asked. Pops watched the sunrise through the window. Now the real work begins. Cleaning up this city, helping it heal, making sure nothing like this happens again." "And your grandson?" "He'll be around." Pops smiled, watching, waiting, making sure the lessons stick. Across town, Agent Monroe began processing arrests. The mayor, the commissioner, council members. Years of corruption exposed to sunlight like cockroaches scattering. Officer Nash submitted his resignation, preparing to join his family in witness protection. But he left behind a legacy. Files of evidence that would keep federal prosecutors busy for years. The storm had passed, but its effects would linger. A city had been shaken awake, forced to confront its shadows. And in those shadows, a message had been sent. Some men couldn't be bought. Some bonds couldn't be broken. And some mistakes came with consequences that no amount of money or power could prevent. Because when you targeted family, when you used a grandfather's love as a weapon, you didn't just wake a sleeping giant. You unleashed a force of nature, and nature, as Zolotov had learned, could be terrifyingly efficient at restoring balance. Morning sunlight filtered through broken clouds, the storm's aftermath leaving the air crisp and clean. At a modest safe house, on the outskirts of town, Pops sat cleaning an old service pistol while Dante watched the perimeter. The peace wouldn't last, they both knew that. Zolotov's organization was wounded, not dead. The first sign came at 9:47 a.m. 3 black SUVs approached from different directions, their coordination obvious to trained eyes. Inside, Zolotov's elite hit squad, men chosen specifically for their ruthlessness. 6 on the north side, Dante noted calmly, checking his weapons. 4 approaching from the east, 3 in reserve. Pops nodded, sliding a magazine into his pistol. Just like Saigon. They never learn. The hit squad expected to find an old man and his grandson hiding, afraid. Instead, they found hunters waiting for prey. Dante had prepared the ground during the night. Subtle tripwires, tactical, positions mapped out, escape routes secured. The first attacker triggered a flashbang trap, momentarily blinding his team. In that instant, Dante moved. 2 men down before they could raise their weapons. A third managed to fire, bullets hitting empty air as Dante flowed like smoke between cover positions. Pops held the back door, his old instincts razor sharp. When 2 attackers tried to flank the house, they found themselves caught in a crossfire. The veteran's shots were precise, economic. No wasted motion, no wasted rounds. "Clear left," Dante called out, advancing through the killing ground he'd created. "Clear right," Pops responded, years of combat experience evident in his voice. The remaining attackers attempted to retreat, but Dante had anticipated this. The SUV's tires were already flat, their electronics disabled. No escape, no rescue, no mercy. When it was over, 13 of Zolotov's best lay dead or unconscious. Dante secured the survivors for questioning while Pops called Detective Grayson. "We've got some garbage that needs collecting," the old veteran said calmly. "Bring body bags." In his hospital room, Zolotov received the news of the failed hit with cold fury. His face was bruised, his throat still bearing the marks of Dante's grip, but his eyes burned with vengeful determination. "Send everyone," he ordered into a secure phone. "Every asset, every operator. I want them dead by sundown." But his empire was already crumbling. FBI agent Monroe's evidence had triggered investigations across 3 states. Police commissioners were being arrested. Judges were facing indictments. Politicians were turning on each other, scrambling to make deals. At the federal building, Monroe pinned another photo to her evidence wall. The money trail leads to shell companies in 12 countries. Real estate deals, construction contracts, all of it dirty. Officer Nash studied the documents spread across her desk. "They're going to try to bury this. Too many powerful people involved. Let them try." Monroe's smile was predatory. "We've got paper trails, witness statements, your evidence. This goes public in 1 hour." The mayor's office was in chaos. Staff, members shredded documents frantically as FBI agents gathered in the lobby. Mayor Andrews himself sat behind his desk, sweat staining his expensive shirt as he tried to delete files. "Sir?" His secretary's voice trembled over the intercom. "They're here." Andrews reached for his bottom drawer, where a pistol waited. But the drawer was already open, the gun missing. "Looking for this?" Dante emerged from the shadows, the mayor's weapon dangling from his fingers. "How did you... when..." "I've been here for 20 minutes. Dante's voice was conversational. "Watching you destroy evidence. Listening to your phone calls. Learning all about the others involved in framing my grandfather." Andrews went pale. "I had no choice. Zolotov owns this town." "Not anymore." The mayor's scream brought FBI agents running, but Dante was already gone. They found Andrews unharmed physically, but broken mentally, babbling about shadows and vengeful ghosts. Detective Grayson's morning got complicated when his wife called. "They're outside our house again. Different men this time, professional looking." "Stay inside. I'm sending help." He dialed Dante's number, but there was no answer. There didn't need to be. The watchers outside Grayson's house never saw what hit them. One moment they were monitoring the detective's family. The next they were unconscious, expertly subdued, zip-tied, and left for Monroe's teams to collect. At the police station, Landon's remaining loyal officers barricaded themselves in, sensing the end approaching. They'd burned files, wiped computers, done everything possible to cover their tracks. But Nash had been one step ahead, copying everything to secure servers. "It's over," Nash announced over the radio. "FBI has everything, every case you fixed, every bribe you took, every innocent person you framed." "Shut up, rookie!" one of the corrupt cops snarled back. "You're dead, you hear me? Dead!" "No." Nash's voice was steady now. "I'm just the beginning. Check your phones." Their phones buzzed simultaneously. Video, files, audio recordings, financial records. Everything they'd tried to hide, Everything they'd tried to bury, all of it uploaded to news outlets across the country. The police chief resigned 10 minutes later. Commissioner Pierce was found in his garage, engine running, but officers pulled him out before he could finish the job. The corrupt judge who'd signed Pops's arrest warrant was caught trying to board a private plane. Zolotov watched his carefully constructed world disintegrate from his hospital bed. Allies turned informant, assets disappeared, bank accounts were frozen. Everything he'd built over decades crumbled in hours. His phone rang, a secure line that supposedly couldn't be traced. "Is it done?" he demanded. "Almost." Dante's voice made the Russian's blood run cold. "Just finishing up with your backup accounts in the Caymans, the ones you thought no one knew about." "How?" "The funny thing about corrupt bankers? They're surprisingly talkative when properly motivated." Monroe's evidence dump hit the media like a tsunami. Headlines screamed about corruption, kickbacks, money laundering. Photos showed politicians taking bribes, judges meeting with criminals, police officers planting evidence. The public's reaction was immediate and fierce. Protesters filled the streets demanding justice. Local news crews camped outside the homes of accused officials. Social media exploded with old videos, forgotten complaints, evidence of years of corruption. At May's diner, Pops watched the coverage on the ancient TV mounted above the counter. Sarah brought him his usual coffee, her hands steady now. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "About the police? The mayor? All of it?" "Truth's a funny thing," Pops replied. "Sometimes it hides for years, but it always comes out eventually." The diner had become a sort of unofficial headquarters. Detective Grayson stopped by with updates. Nash dropped off files before going into witness protection. Even Monroe appeared occasionally, sharing information over coffee and pie. But the war wasn't over. Zolotov still had resources, still had loyal soldiers. His influence stretched beyond the city, into places where money meant more than law. At noon, he made his move. A coordinated attack on multiple fronts. Teams of mercenaries hit safe houses across the city. Corrupt cops still loyal to him moved against potential witnesses. Even from his hospital bed, he commanded his forces like a general deploying troops. What he didn't know was that Dante had anticipated this. Each attack found empty buildings, absent targets, frustrated hunters. And behind them, a shadow moved, picking them off one by one. "The warehouse on Front Street," Dante's voice came through Monroe's secure line. "You'll find 6 of Zolotov's men zip-tied inside, along with evidence linking them to 3 unsolved murders." "How are you doing this?" she demanded. "I had a good teacher. Pops always said the best way to win a war is to be everywhere and nowhere." At the Federal Building, Monroe's task force worked around the clock. Nash's evidence combined with Dante's captures painted a picture of corruption so vast it seemed impossible. Construction contracts inflated by millions, an analyst reported. Kickbacks to city officials, permits fast-tracked for bribes, and that's just the legitimate business side. "The illegal operations?" Monroe asked. "Money laundering through shell companies, protection rackets, evidence tampering, murder for hire. They weren't just corrupt, they turned the whole city into a criminal enterprise." The afternoon brought more arrests. A prominent developer caught shredding documents. A city council member found with offshore account numbers. A police captain trying to flee the country. But it also brought violence. Zolotov's desperate supporters lashed out randomly. A witness's car was bombed. A journalist's house was shot at. Even Monroe's office received a suspicious package, which Dante intercepted before it could reach her. "Thank you," she said when she learned about it later. "Don't thank me yet." His voice was grim. "Zolotov's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, but they're also the most dangerous." At the hospital, Zolotov signed himself out against medical advice. His injuries weren't fully healed, but he couldn't afford to stay in one place. His phone had been compromised, his accounts frozen, his allies arrested or in hiding, but he still had one card to play. One final plan that would either save his empire or burn it all down. "Bring me the old man," he ordered his remaining lieutenants. Alive or dead, his grandson wants to play games. Let's see how he plays when his grandfather's head is delivered to his door. The order went out through what remained of his network. Every surviving asset, every loyal soldier, every corrupt cop still free, all focused on one target. What they didn't know was that this was exactly what Dante had been waiting for, because sometimes, to destroy a snake, you had to let it strike first. As evening approached, the city held its breath. More evidence emerged hourly. More officials confessed. More corrupt cops turned themselves in, hoping for deals. At the safe house, Pops cleaned his pistol again, a ritual that had served him well for decades. They'll come soon. Dante nodded, checking his own weapons. They're predictable that way. Just like in '68, Pops smiled, when they thought they had us surrounded in that village. How'd that work out for them? About as well as this will. The old veteran's eyes were hard. You know what your grandmother used to say? Evil's like a bad house. Looks strong on the outside, but rot in the foundation brings it down every time. Outside, the sun began to set. In offices and safe houses across the city, evidence was gathered. Witnesses were protected. Plans were made. But the real action would come in darkness, because Dante Carter hadn't come home just to save his grandfather. He'd come to tear down an empire, and empires, as history had shown, often fell in the dark. The city erupted in chaos as citizens took to the streets, their anger fueled by each new revelation of corruption. Police barricades surrounded City Hall, but they weren't protecting officials from protesters. They were preventing more corrupt politicians from fleeing. Every hour brought new arrests, new confessions, new evidence of how deep the rot went. Zolotov watched the uprising from his fortified mansion outside city limits. The property sat on 20 acres of private land, surrounded by state-of-the-art security systems and armed guards. Former Special Forces operators patrolled the grounds, while drones monitored the perimeter. It was a fortress, or so he believed. Status report. He barked into his phone, his voice still rough from Dante's attack. The city's lost, his security chief admitted. FBI has frozen most accounts. Police commissioner turned state's evidence. Even the judge is talking. And Carter? No sign of him or the old man. They've gone dark. Zolotov slammed his fist on his desk. Find them. Use everything we have left. Every contact, every asset, every... A familiar voice interrupted from the shadows. Looking for us? Pops stepped into the light, looking remarkably calm for a man who'd recently been imprisoned. Behind him, Dante emerged like smoke becoming. Solid, how... Zolotov reached for his desk drawer. Don't. Dante's voice was soft. Your guards are taking a nap. Your security system is offline. Your reinforcements aren't coming. You can't kill me. Zolotov's voice shook slightly. I have too much information. Too many powerful friends. Kill you? Pops chuckled. Son, if we wanted you dead, you'd never have seen us coming. No, this is about justice. FBI agent Monroe's voice came from the doorway as she entered with her tactical team. Viktor Zolotov, you're under arrest. Across town, corrupt officials were learning hard lessons about loyalty. The mayor broke first, trading evidence for leniency. His testimony implicated council members, business leaders, and police officials in decades of criminal activity. Detective Grayson coordinated with state police to round up the remaining corrupt officers. Some surrendered quietly. Others tried to resist. None succeeded. It's like dominoes, Grayson told Monroe. One falls, takes down 10 more. Speaking of which, Monroe handed him a file. Your wife and son can come home now. Witness protection confirms the threat's been neutralized. Officer Nash watched the cleanup operation from a secure location, his pregnant wife beside him. His evidence had helped break the case, but the cost had been high. They'd have to relocate, start fresh somewhere new. Was it worth it? His wife asked softly. Nash watched another corrupt official being led away in handcuffs. Someone had to stand up. Might as well be us. The mansion's security teams woke to find themselves zip-tied and surrounded by federal agents. Their weapons had been disabled, their communications cut, their escape routes blocked. Professional operators who'd never failed a mission learned what it meant to face someone better. "How many did you take out?" Monroe asked Dante. 26 on the grounds, 8 on the roof, 4 in the security center. He paused. All alive. Mostly. Inside, Zolotov's mask of civilization finally cracked. "You think this ends with me? The system is bigger than one man. There will always be corruption." "Maybe." Pop stood before him, decades of combat experience, evident in his stance. "But there will always be people willing to fight it. People who remember what honor means." As federal agents led Zolotov away, Dante accessed his computer system. Files opened, passwords cracked, hidden accounts exposed. The full scope of his operation laid bare, a criminal empire spanning continents. "My God," Monroe whispered, scanning the data. Human trafficking, weapons deals, political assassinations. He wasn't just corrupting the city, he was building a shadow government. "Power corrupts," Pops quoted softly. "Absolute power corrupts absolutely." The city began to heal, but healing meant pain first. Trusted officials were revealed as criminals. Respected business leaders were exposed as conspirators. Even religious leaders had taken bribes to look the other way. But from the ashes, something new emerged. Young leaders stepped forward, determined to rebuild with transparency and honor. Community organizations formed to monitor government actions. Citizens demanded, and got, oversight committees with real power. Dante watched it all from the shadows, making sure the cleanup stayed clean. When a newly appointed official tried to bury evidence, he found his corrupt files mysteriously leaked to the press. When a judge attempted to dismiss charges, his own criminal activities suddenly came to light. "You can't watch them forever," Monroe told him during a private meeting. "No," Dante agreed, "but I can make them remember what happens when they abuse power." At May's Diner, Pops returned to his usual booth. Sarah served him coffee with steady hands and a bright smile. The regular customers welcomed him back like a hero, but he deflected their praise. "Heroes?" He shook his head. "No, just people who remembered their oath, to protect and serve, all the people, not just the powerful ones." Detective Grayson joined him, sliding into the opposite seat. "City council's being reformed, special elections next month, independent oversight for the police department." "Good start," Pops nodded. "But the real work is just beginning." Speaking of which, Grayson handed him a file. "These are the names Monroe's team found. Other cities, other corrupt officials. Seems Zolotov's network went further than we thought." Pops smiled slightly. "Might need to take a road trip, see some old friends. Need company?" "Thanks, but I've got family for that." Outside, Dante moved through the city like a guardian spirit. His grandfather had taught him that winning the war was just the first step. Keeping the peace, that was the real challenge. The last of Zolotov's men tried one final desperate move. They attempted to assassinate the federal prosecutor handling the case. Instead, they found themselves delivered to FBI headquarters, gift-wrapped and ready to confess. "Your grandson," Monroe told Pops. "He's something else." "He is what the times demanded," Pops replied. "Just like in Nam, when the world gets dark enough, it creates its own light." The city would never be the same. The corruption had run too deep, the wounds were too fresh. But from the ashes of the old system, something new was growing. Something built on transparency, accountability, and the understanding that power came with responsibility. Zolotov sat in his cell, a broken man. His empire had crumbled. His allies had betrayed him. His carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation had shattered. "You know what your mistake was?" Pops visited him one last time. "You thought power came from money and fear. But real power? That comes from standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." As summer turned to fall, the city began to rebuild. New leaders emerged, carefully watched by both official oversight and shadowy guardians. The lesson had been learned. Corruption might be eternal, but so was the fight against it. Dante disappeared, back into the shadows, but his presence lingered like a warning. Those who sought to abuse power found their plans exposed. their schemes unraveled, their corruption revealed. "Will he ever come back?" Nash asked before leaving for his new life. "He never really leaves," Pops smiled. "That's what scares them the most." In the end, it wasn't just about saving one man or exposing one conspiracy. It was about reminding people that justice wasn't just a word, that honor wasn't outdated, that one person standing up could inspire others to stand as well. The city had learned its lesson. The corrupt had learned to fear the shadows. And somewhere out there, a grandson continued his grandfather's legacy, protecting the weak, fighting corruption, and reminding the powerful that some things were worth dying for. And in his usual booth at May's Diner, Pop sipped his coffee and smiled, because he knew that while the battle was over, the war for justice would never end. But now, the good guys had a ghost on their side, a ghost who'd learned his most important lessons, not in combat, but from an old veteran who remembered what America was supposed to stand for, what it could be again, if enough people were willing to stand up and fight for what was right. The sun set on a changed city, but in the shadows, justice still moved, still watched, still waited, because some things were worth fighting for. Some battles needed to be fought again and again. And some warriors never truly retired. They just taught the next generation to carry on the fight. Fall colors painted the city in shades of red and gold as Pop stood before a row of graves at Arlington National Cemetery. Each headstone told a story of sacrifice, of duty, of honor. He placed flowers on several. Old friends from Vietnam, soldiers who'd understood what it meant to fight for something bigger than themselves. Detective Grayson's wife was buried here too, another casualty of Zolotov's corruption. She died protecting their son from a hit team, giving Tommy enough time to escape through a back window. Pops laid flowers on her grave as well, standing silent in remembrance. She was a fighter. Dante's voice came from behind him. Like mother, like son. Tommy Grayson had followed in his mother's footsteps, entering the police academy with a determination to continue her legacy of integrity. His father watched his training with pride, tinged by worry, knowing the dangers but understanding the calling. Across town, FBI agent Monroe presented her final report to a closed Senate committee. The evidence painted a picture of corruption, so vast it seemed impossible. Dozens of cities, hundreds of officials, billions in illegal funds. "And you're certain all of Zolotov's network has been exposed?" a senator asked. "The visible part," Monroe answered carefully. "But like any cancer, we have to watch for signs of it returning." The committee members shifted uncomfortably, aware that some of their own colleagues had been implicated in the investigation. Several seats in the chamber were noticeably empty. Officer Nash, now Detective Nash in a city 2,000 miles away, built a new life with his family. His son was born in witness protection, a healthy boy they named Harold, after the veteran who'd inspired his father to take a stand. "Your evidence changed everything," Monroe told him during a secure video call. "Started a wave that's still spreading." Nash watched his son sleeping peacefully. "Someone had to stand up. Might as well be us." The words echoed across the country as more people came forward, exposing corruption in their own communities. Dante's shadow war had inspired others to fight back, to reclaim their cities from those who'd abused power. In his prison cell, Zolotov received visitors from agencies that officially didn't exist. They offered him deals, promised protection, tried to buy his silence about operations even darker than those exposed. "You don't understand," he told them. "There's nothing you can offer that would protect me from him." The next morning, Zolotov was found dead in his cell, not murdered, but broken. The official cause was heart failure, but those who saw him knew the truth. He died of fear, waiting for a ghost that never came. At May's Diner, Pops shared coffee with Detective Grayson. The place had become a symbol of resistance, of ordinary people standing up to corruption. Sarah, the once nervous waitress, now owned it, bought with reward money from helping expose evidence of money laundering. "Tommy graduates next week," Grayson said, pride evident in his voice. "Top of his class." Following in his mother's footsteps, Pops nodded. She'd be proud. "The new commissioner wants him in internal affairs. Says we need officers who understand what corruption costs. A newspaper on the counter carried the headline, "Reform continues. New oversight laws passed." The article detailed how cities across the country were implementing systems to prevent the kind of corruption Zolotov had built. But real change happened in smaller ways too. Beat cops reporting bribes instead of taking them, citizens filming, police interactions, community leaders demanding transparency. The darkness hadn't been defeated, but it had been pushed back. Dante's work continued in the shadows. When corruption tried to take root in other cities, evidence would mysteriously appear in the right hands. When dirty cops thought they were untouchable, they learned otherwise. "Your grandson," Monroe told Pops during a private meeting. "He's become something of a legend in law enforcement circles. The ghost who haunts the corrupt." "Sometimes," Pops replied, "people need to believe in something bigger than themselves, something that reminds them justice isn't just a word." The city itself was healing, growing stronger through transparency and accountability. The new mayor, a former community organizer, implemented oversight systems that became models for other communities. Detective Grayson led training sessions for police departments nationwide, teaching officers about the importance of integrity and the cost of corruption. His personal story, the loss of his wife, his role in exposing the truth, carried weight that textbooks couldn't match. "It's not just about following rules," he told them. "It's about remembering who we serve. All the people, not just the powerful ones." The criminal underworld learned new lessons too. Those who tried to fill the power vacuum left by Zolotov's fall found themselves exposed, their operations disrupted by an unseen hand. "There are rumors," a crime boss told his lieutenants, "about a ghost. Someone who can't be bought, can't be threatened, can't be stopped." The rumors spread, becoming almost mythical. A shadow that protected the innocent. A warrior who'd learned honor from a veteran grandfather. A force that reminded the powerful that justice wasn't just a concept. Pops received a mysterious bank transfer. Compensation from a military official who'd wanted Zolotov's operation to succeed. He donated it all to programs helping homeless veterans, remembering Reggie and others who'd served their country only to be forgotten. "You could have kept it," Monroe observed. "No one would have known." "I would have known," Pops replied simply. "Some things matter more than money." The lessons spread beyond the city. Police departments implemented new oversight systems. Community groups formed watchdog organizations. Citizens learned that standing up to corruption wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Tommy Grayson's graduation ceremony was attended by hundreds of officers, all wearing black bands in memory of his mother. When he received his badge, the applause wasn't just for him, it was for every officer who chose integrity over easiness. "Your mother wore this badge," the new commissioner said, pinning it on Tommy's uniform. "She believed in what it stood for. Not power, but service. Not control, but protection." Dante watched from the shadows, remembering his own ceremonies, his own oaths. The military had taught him how to fight, but his grandfather had taught him what to fight for. The city's transformation became a case study in reform. Journalists wrote about the miracle of municipal renewal. Academics studied the systemic changes. But few understood the real story, of a veteran who wouldn't be broken, and a grandson who'd learned his lessons well. "Will it last?" Nash asked during another secure call. "The changes, the reforms?" "It'll last as long as people remember," Pops answered. "As long as they're willing to stand up, speak out, fight back." The old veteran's words carried weight because he'd lived them. Through war, through peace, through corruption and renewal, he'd stood by his principles. Now others stood with him. Monroe's investigation expanded, following threads of corruption across borders. Each exposed operation, each arrested official, each reform department created ripples that spread further. "Your grandfather," she told Dante during a rare face-to-face meeting, "he started something bigger than all of us." "He reminded people what was possible," Dante replied. "The rest was up to them." In cities across the country, corrupt officials began looking over their shoulders, feeling watched. The ghost stories spread, of evidence appearing mysteriously, of operations exposed without warning, of justice moving in shadows. But the real change wasn't in the shadows. It was in broad daylight, in ordinary people making different choices. Police officers reporting misconduct, citizens demanding accountability, leaders choosing integrity over expediency. At Arlington, Pop stood again before the graves of fallen friends. This time, he wasn't alone. Tommy Grayson stood beside him, in his new uniform, understanding the cost of the badge he wore. "My mom," Tommy said quietly. "She used to tell me that honor wasn't just a word. It was a choice you made every day." "Smart woman," Pops nodded. She understood what a lot of people forget, that the biggest battles aren't fought with guns. They're fought in moments of choice. The autumn wind rustled through leaves as they stood in silence, remembering. Above them, unseen, Dante kept watch. The ghost who reminded the corrupt that justice wasn't just a concept. The warrior who'd learned his most important lessons, not in combat, but from an old veteran who remembered what service meant. The sun set on a changed city, but the work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Corruption would always exist, would always try to grow back in dark places. But now, there were people who stood against it. Officers like Tommy Grayson, carrying his mother's badge and principles. Agents like Monroe, following evidence wherever it led. Citizens who'd learned that silence served corruption, and in the shadows a ghost moved. Watching, waiting, reminding the powerful that some things were worth fighting for. Some principles couldn't be bought. Some warriors never stopped serving. The legend grew, spreading like ripples in a pond. A story of a veteran who wouldn't break, and a grandson who became something more than human. A tale of corruption exposed and justice restored. But the real story was simpler. It was about choices made in moments of truth. About standing up when others stayed silent. About remembering that honor wasn't just a word. It was a way of life. Pops returned to his usual booth at May's Diner, watching the city he'd helped save. Sarah brought his coffee without asking, her confidence now matching her competence. Through the window, he saw Tommy Grayson in his patrol car, watching the streets with the same dedication his mother had shown. Across town, Monroe built cases against corruption in other cities, and somewhere out there a ghost continued his work. The battle wasn't over. It would never be over. But now they had something they didn't have before. Hope. Hope that one person standing up could inspire others. Hope that honor still meant something. Hope that justice, though slow, was still possible. And in the shadows, a grandson kept his watch, carrying forward lessons learned from an old veteran who never forgot what America was supposed to stand for, what it could be again, if enough people were willing to fight for it. The legend would grow, but the truth was stronger than any legend. Because in the end, it wasn't about ghosts or shadows or revenge. It was about a grandfather and grandson who remembered what others had forgotten, that some things were worth fighting for. Some battles needed to be fought again and again, and some warriors never truly retired. They just taught the next generation to carry on the fight. What would you risk to fight corruption? How far would you go to protect family? And when the system itself becomes the enemy, who do you trust to make it right? If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of standing up against corruption, hit that like button and subscribe. Because there are more tales of justice coming, more stories of those who chose to fight back, more reminders that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a gun. It's the courage to say, enough.